Hello and welcome to the time-lapse video for Robowrangler, my entry to the GMTK Game Jam. The theme for the Game Jam this time was out of control. So in this video I'm going to give a rough commentary on some of the interesting parts of the development process for this game. I pretty much got straight to work as soon as the jam started. One thing I would say though is make sure to take regular breaks. It's said all too often, but it really is true. So, I actually got the idea quite early on, which is very unusual for me. So I knew almost instantly that I wanted to do some kind of indirect control game, where you don't control the character directly, but you control the environment around them. And that would be how I would fit with the theme out of control. I used Asprite for all of the pixel art, and then imported it into Unity using the Unity Asprite importer by Martin Hodler. So the first thing I actually started off with was UI. So I made the UI for item placement, and I made a few UI icons which I only ended up using about half of in the final game. This really helped me to decide early on how I wanted the game to look and feel. Ideally, I would probably work on getting the game functional first and then figure out graphics later, but I always find it just easier if I can envision what the game's going to look like. And doing graphics first works for me. I originally used some art assets from Kenny.nl as reference for my pixel art, but after I'd finished off the ground tile set, I decided to drop it as reference and just continue on in the same rough style, which I think turned out alright. The robot also fit fairly well with the art style, but the main reason I decided to do a robot over a person is because I am really bad at drawing people. You'll notice in all my previous games, it's always an animal. And the only one where it isn't an animal, I spent, I think, 4 hours on a tiny little guy. So, yeah. In a game jam, if you're not good at something, just do something else. You don't have time to worry about it. I also used the Pico 8 colour palette because I've always liked the aesthetic that a lot of Pico 8 games have, and I wanted to try and make something bright and vibrant. At this point in the time lapse, I'm coming up to the end of the first day, and at this point I had most of the art in the game. I also had the player mostly working, and I'd also completely finished the item placement system. The only real things I had left were wires, as well as sounds, and then designing levels. So now on to some slightly more technical things. I decided to use the Unity physics system for all of the physics in the game, which was probably a bad idea. The default Unity physics aren't exactly consistent, and they certainly don't work well for really precise collisions, like would be needed on a grid. At first, I also decided to use a physics system for the robot movement, but I eventually switched over to, instead of using a rigid body, manually raycasting, which was much more consistent, and gave me much more control over the actual movement. The glue that held this game together, so to speak, was state machines. I used a really small Unity package that I made, which I'll link in the description, called Multistate, which is basically just a collection of scripts for making state machines. Kind of like the ones in the Unity animator, but through pure code. This allowed me to really easily separate the play and edit states, allowing me to write completely separate code that didn't need to know anything about the other state. It also meant that I could have individual states for placing and removing objects, which further helped to make the code separate, clean, and easy to add on to later. The conveyors were probably the one thing that ended up causing the most problems with the game, especially since the player can move over them. It became really difficult to design puzzles with them, because you could just use them like normal building blocks, and ignore the fact that they're conveyors. So, in hindsight, I should have added in areas that you weren't able to place blocks in, and I think that would have allowed me a lot more freedom with designing puzzles, because it did become very challenging to make puzzles that you couldn't just beat by stacking up blocks near the exit. On that note, I'm also hoping to continue on with this idea, and I'll be rebuilding this game from scratch, hopefully making it slightly better, and I'll be uploading devlog videos on this channel, so stay tuned for more content. We're now coming up to the end of the time lapse, so thank you for watching and see you next time.